Get started tonight. My name is John Dieter. I'm the superintendent of Northbrook District 27. Joining me tonight on the webinar for the information about our referendum is our assistant superintendent for finance and facilities, Dr. Kimberly Rio, and our director of communications, Ms. Tara O'Connell. They will be on the webinar. They're going to turn off their cameras and be in the background, and they're going to help me tonight with answering questions as they come up. As you can see on your screen, there's a Q&A button. If you have questions at any time during the presentation, please feel free to type them into that Q&A function. The chat is not lit up for this, but the Q&A is, and will either be answered throughout the presentation, or if they're pertinent for everybody, we may save them to the end. So like I said, if a question comes up, please just enter it at any time. This webinar is being recorded, so if you want to go back and revisit anything, it'll be posted on our website, and you can also let your family, friends, and neighbors know that it can be found on our website as well. All right, and so I guess without further ado, let's get started. And again, thank you so much for your time, taking time out of your busy days and evenings to be with us tonight to learn more about our referendum here in Northbrook District 27. All right, for some of you that joined us for an earlier webinar, some of the earlier slides will look familiar, but I think it's important that we set the context and give some background information to what's led us here today. And for starters, I want to point out our mission statement here in District 27. Our mission is to educate students to succeed in a changing world. And that's something that we take very seriously in our district, and we have a long-standing tradition of excellence. And we really do attribute that excellence to the strong partnerships that we have with our staff, our parents, and our students. We really strive to meet the high expectations that have been set by our community. Our district is small. We have about 1,300 students over 3 buildings. And the size of our district makes it so we can get to know all of our students and all of our families. And really, that's what lends to our wonderful atmosphere here in District 27. And a lot of times I do hear parents say that they feel like we are a private school setting, but we are obviously a public school. Our collaboration and the work that we do here has made us one of the highest achieving districts in the state of Illinois. In fact, we are consistently in the top 1% in the state for our IAR scores, the Illinois Assessment of Readiness. You can see the graph here that we well exceed the state average, and really the state average is something that we pay attention to, but we know that we will always well exceed the state average. So here in Northbrook 27, we also pay attention to our peer schools here in Northfield Township, the other schools that feed into Glenbrook North and Glenbrook South, and we pay attention to some of the other schools in the North Shore. And as you can see, we still perform very well in consideration to all of our peers. And again, this is something that we strive for. We know it's important for our families, and it's important for all of us to maintain this level of excellence. The other thing that we pay close attention to in District 27 is our perception data, our satisfaction rates. Every other year, and we did this last year and we'll do it again next year, we do it in the even years, we will survey, the odd years in the fall, we will survey our students in grades, starting in grades 4 through 8. We will survey our staff and all of our parents. And we use a company that is a national company that gives us a satisfaction rank amongst our peer schools. They take a look at other suburban schools throughout the country with a similar demographic to we have, and they'll tell us how we compare. And we are consistently in the 98th and 99th percentile in our satisfaction data that we compile. And again, that is something that's a great source of pride for us here. And we have been able to achieve our high levels of satisfaction and high levels of achievement while staying within our financial means. To this point, we always operate on a balanced budget, and we have no long-term debt. District 27 has never had to borrow money up till this point, and that's something, again, that is a source of pride for us and something that we do not take for granted, even as we reach a point where we feel like we have to explore that avenue now. When it comes to education, we prioritize the classroom. We try to keep as much money and as much of our resources into the classroom and into the students and teachers as we can. And so you'll see that on the graphs here, it depicts that 55% of our funding is spent in the classroom compared to a state average of 46%. We really do respect the tax dollars, and we work aggressively to save as much money as we can by looking for partnerships, ways to consolidate debt, always bidding to get the lowest prices possible. We always look for a way to be as fiscally responsible as possible. And that's been reflected in some of the awards we've received. For 15 years running, we've received Excellence in Financial Reporting Awards from the Association of School Boards, the national organization, and other organizations as well. This really is a tribute to our finance department here and the legacy that we have in Northbrook 27, that we always maintain a very transparent and responsible budget. And we take, again, that's a source of great pride for us here. All right, and as I alluded to earlier, we are at a point, however, that if we're going to be able to maintain things like our small class sizes and the great student-teacher ratios that we have in these learning environments, we are going to have to seek some additional funding. And as we get into the presentation, I'll explain how we've reached that point. For starters, every 10 years, the state of Illinois requires us to conduct a health life safety report. We have to contract with a licensed architectural firm in the state to come in and examine our facilities from top to bottom. They take a very close look and they let us know of anything that needs to be addressed. And we had anticipated this. Our most recent study was done in 2021, the 21-22 school year. And we knew that our roofs on all three buildings, our HVAC and some of our electrical equipment was at the end of life. Typically in our climate, a roof can get 25 years, and our roofs were pushing 30 years and are pushing 30 years, the ones that we haven't replaced yet. Our HVAC equipment dates to the early 90s, the equipment that hadn't been replaced. And what we've done is always had a very proactive maintenance program to really try to extend the life of these things. And I'll touch on that a little bit more later. But we also, at the same time that we had our health life safety report commissioned, we also took a look at all of our facilities. We did a facility use study, and we looked at things like our fixtures, our classrooms. We do know that our classroom furniture, much of it's dated back to the 1980s. Our carpeting is towards the end of life, and flooring throughout our buildings. Our technology, we've done a great job of keeping our technology up to date, but we've got some things like our infrastructure. We have wireless technology throughout our buildings, but the routers that are in our ceilings throughout the school are still being powered, if you will. They're connected by wires that were first installed in the early 2000s, late 90s, when we were plugging our computers into the wall still and hardwiring those. And so to maintain the connectivity in this day of AI and everything that's coming down the pike, we have some upgrades and things that have to be done in that area as well. Another thing we're very proud of in our district is our safety program. We actually have a patented safety protocol that's been a model for other schools in the area. Our schools are extremely safe, but this is an area that constantly evolves, and we know we can always do things to make them a little safer. Over the past few summers, we have put keyless entry fobs in all of our exterior doors. The one you see here pictured in the upper right is a key fob for an interior door that we use for an entrance into and out of where we have our board meetings, for example. And what we would like to do is upgrade all of our doors to these fob, the keyless entry points that can be locked and unlocked remotely to really enhance safety. That's just one example. Another need that we've had develop recently is that we are running out of space to meet the needs for early childhood programming and special education. We are required to offer services to education for students that have IEPs, students with special needs, from the day they turn age 3. So we have to offer a high quality preschool program for children when they reach the age of 3. Traditionally in our district, we have worked with outside partners to offer this. We worked with our special education cooperative True North for many years, and our families, the children would attend preschool in offsite locations, maybe in Highland Park or elsewhere. More recently, we partnered with some of our other Northfield Township schools, and our families would have preschool children attend in District 31 or maybe District 30 for early childhood programming. However, as the demand has increased throughout the state, our neighbors could no longer accommodate our students. So we had to open an early childhood classroom in our district. And while that's actually very exciting for us, it's something that I, as a superintendent, believe very strongly in, is the power of early childhood education. And I'm very pleased that we can offer it in our schools. However, one of the stipulations that we have to meet is when our classrooms are established, we need a ratio of children that have IEPs of 30% of the students have an IEP and 70% are community peers that are typically developing. We have to maintain that ratio to stay in compliance with the state. And so currently we have one classroom that has an AM and a PM preschool, but we still have students placed outside the district that we cannot serve at Hickory Point because we don't have the space. And so we need to add some additional space to Hickory Point to accommodate this. And while this is happening in early childhood, we're also seeing a similar trend in special education. We've also relied on partnerships for some of our special education programs where our students have attended classrooms in other schools nearby. And again, due to an increased demand in these areas, we are now having to have these classrooms come into our campus and service the students here. In many ways, this is great news, but the challenge and the reason we hadn't done it sooner is that we don't have the space. And so we really have to create that space now. I'll show you a little bit about how we've been creative, but it's really not ideal. Another thing we have to address is our infrastructure, our parking lots. Much like a roof, a parking lot has a limited lifespan. When you live in a climate like Northern Illinois, when you have many frosts, freezes, and thaws, and time again, you'll open up potholes in your parking lots. At Wood Oaks, especially, our parking lot is towards the end of life. And we also know that it's not large enough. When we have large events in the evening, a band concert, an orchestra concert, we have to park people in the drop-off loops and lanes and have staff out there to direct traffic so we're not blocking fire lanes and other safety concerns like that. And also at Wood Oaks, in the morning time and in the afternoon, it's our only school where we are not able to separate bus and parent traffic. And so we have a design in mind that will allow us to separate that traffic, which will reduce the time in the drop-off lines. It'll take traffic off from Sanders Road in the morning so people can pass by the school easier before and after school, and just make it a safer area for students and staff. And I mentioned this before, our preventative maintenance programs, we really have gotten the most out of our facilities and our equipment. We maintain our HVAC, we maintain our roofs, our parking lots, we patch, we seal, we do everything we can to get the longest life possible. But it just so happens that we're reaching the end of life to many things at the same time. You can see some of the pictures here. In more recent years, we've even started to do more of the work to our buildings ourselves. One of the things we did at Hickory Point was we added a full-time assistant principal, and to make room in the main office for an office there, we moved a teacher workstation into an open area within the school. And to create some barriers for that, our staff created some walls and made a little teacher work area in the center of the school. The picture on the lower right shows that we created a sensory area for some of our students, and we needed a separate door for that. So our staff created a separate doorway out of the brick wall. We have spent actually over the past 5 years out of our fund balance, $13.5 million to address our needs. And unfortunately, we have identified mandatory needs that exceed that, and other needs that we feel are important that go well beyond the 13 million that we've already spent. All right. And as I said, we're just at the point where we can't keep up with some of the increased costs. You can see the picture here that we rely on our local funding sources more than most districts do in the state. There's a few reasons for that. One, several years ago, I believe it was 2017, the state of Illinois adopted an evidence-based funding model. And in that model, they are focusing most of the revenue, most of the funds from the state into the lower funded districts. And so districts like ours, we haven't received a significant increase in state funding in many years, and nor will we until the state reaches a more balanced plateau of funding. And that's going to take several more years, another decade or more, I think, until the state feels like the evidence-based funding model has done its job completely. And we also do not receive a lot of federal funds. Um, Federal funds come to schools mostly through Title I, which is focused on poverty levels, on free and reduced lunch counts, and so on. And our district, our community is fortunate that we do not have a lot of families that receive that level of support, and hence we do not receive that funding in the schools either. So it really puts a lot of stress on our local funding model here. Another thing that's changed over the years, I look at three different factors. Those of you that have lived in the community for a while, you may recall that in this district, there was actually another school that sat on the same property as Shiboni. Grove School was there until around the year 2010. When that started to show a lot of age, the district had to make a decision at the time if they were going to put a lot of money into that school that had a lot of issues with its infrastructure, or if they wanted to tear it down and add additional classroom space at Shiboni and at Hickory Point. Well, obviously, the decision was made to tear that school down and add on to Shiboni and Hickory Point. And this was done over a 10-year long-term planning cycle before it was all said and done and the changes finally took place. And again, as I said earlier, the district didn't borrow any money to do that, and that's phenomenal. And some of the things that have changed include the cost of construction. We looked up the history of those projects, and the cost of construction at that time was around $150 per square foot. Now we're getting bids that come in closer to 400, maybe even as high as 500 per square foot, depending on the type of space that's being built. Another factor we had at that time was we were receiving some money from a TIF, from a tax incentive on a development on Lake Cook Road. And so from around 1995 to 2005, the district was receiving an extra $1 million per year from that funding source. And the district was wise and put that money into savings and then was able to use it when it was time for that project of the demolition of Grove School and the additions onto the other buildings. And then another factor that has changed is just the needs in students. You know, I mentioned we added a full-time assistant principal at Hickory Point. We're seeing a different level of needs from students that enter our schools in 2020s than we were seeing in the past. They need a lot more support. And so as a result, we've been adding staff to help with that support, especially in the social emotional part. We've added a great deal of staff that we didn't have in the past. And with that comes expenses that we don't have, or it takes cost that we cannot put into our buildings, but we have to put into our staff. And in a school, typically 80% or more of your funding will go towards staff. That's the biggest part of a school's expenditure. All right, and so with these challenges, we have come up with a plan. We've been talking about this at the board level for many years. The Board of Education and the administration have been talking about the needs that we have. And we finally felt like it was the right time to come together and involve the community. And so this fall, we started collaborating with the community to develop a plan for funding and financing that brings us here today as we're getting ready for a referendum. What we've done for the community process, as I mentioned earlier, we reviewed our current infrastructure. This was through the Health Life Safety Report. This was done through our own facility use study that we've done. And then we went out and we identified some priorities and gathered some community committees. We did some feedback seminars prior to the holidays. We did a webinar then, and we did a phone survey and conducted outreach to the community to get some thoughts and input on it. So we presented different project options that we'd identified, and we also talked about funding mechanisms and a level of funding. You know, we came up, for example, with about 10 projects that we felt could be important and very impactful for our community. And had we done all of those things, we would have needed a high level of funding. We also told the community that we could knock off some priorities, not everything we wanted, but a mid-level project and a mid-level of funding. And then we had the lowest amount of funding, the things that we had to address for the health, life, safety report. And so we went through that process and we have developed the plan, which I'll go into a little more detail. So the plan that we came up with is to ask for the establishment of a debt service extension base, or a DSEB, for the district. And that would come in at 2.655 million and result in an annual tax increase of $422 for an average homeowner. When I say average homeowner, that is a house with an assessed value of $600,000, which is pretty much the average range in our community, in our school district. A debt service extension base, or a DSEB, is kind of like having a home equity line of credit. We are capped, however, at paying back per year a maximum of $2.655 million. This is how much we could pay back on borrowed money with principal and interest. We could pay less than that, but we cannot exceed that. And if we were to levy bonds up to that full extent of what we could pay per year, we could raise about $43.5 million to help us address our facilities, to make our schools safe, and to improve the learning environment for all students. And again, it's also a sustainable way. Once we have a DSEB established, that is something that our district will always have. In fact, about 92% of school districts in the state of Illinois already have a DSEB. I'll explain that in just a second. Prior to the 1990s, when school districts needed to raise money to do things like replace their roofs, parking lots, and so on, they would simply levy a bond. They would sell some bonds and then pass that on to the taxpayers as an increase. So the state of Illinois in the 1990s, early 90s, said, no, really, if you're going to raise taxes, there should be a referendum so taxpayers can have a say in what they're paying. But they did say that any district that had debt outstanding, they were grandfathered and they could continue to have that source of financing for perpetuity. So in the 1990s, if you had a bond in a school district and you were paying $2 million a year on that bond, you still have that in place today in 2025. And the state even gave a little bit of notice that this was coming. So several districts throughout the state decided to go out and levy bonds so they could establish a DSEB. In the 1990s, District 27 and only a handful of others, including our neighbor in 28, never established this DSEB. And we've always been able to address our needs throughout our existing budget, and our savings are called our fund balance. And however, as I said earlier, we're just at a point now with so many needs coming up at once that we really are missing this option of a DSEB, and we feel that it's time to ask for that. One of the other things we could explore, in addition to a DSEB, would be a traditional bond. And a traditional bond would be, let's say we wanted to raise $43.5 million, we would simply ask the community, would you approve us to sell a bond or a small series of bonds that would allow us to raise $43 million? And in a traditional bond, that would come with a 25 or 30-year term that would expire. We would know the interest rate and everything like that right up front. And in a traditional bond, we also have a time limit of 3 years that we have to start to spend that money after the community approves the referendum. With a DSEB, some advantages that it has is that it does not sunset. It doesn't go away. It'll be a source of funding like most schools in the state have for this district moving forward. And also, we don't have a 3-year time limit. We can levy the debt as the projects become necessary. And so if we can go another 5 years on a roof, for example, or a parking lot, we don't have to do it within 3 years of our referendum. We can wait until the need comes, and then we can issue that bond. However, we can never exceed that $2.6 million per year payment in principal or interest. So that's some reassurance that the community has that the district has to stay within those means and not exceed that payment amount per year. And when we presented this to our community earlier in the year for feedback, they did feel like overwhelmingly by almost 84% that the D27 was the better fit for our community and our needs. All right, and so what are some of the things that we want to focus on? Well, we do know, as I said earlier, we have to focus on these things from the Health Life Safety Report. You can see the picture here of some of our older equipment, machinery and things that have just reached the end of life. When these things do break down, and they do from time to time, the equipment's getting so old that parts are hard to find. And sometimes a part that could have been shipped overnight, now we have to wait for it to come from California or Texas or somewhere far away. And so we're taxing the other parts of the system to try to keep the building warm or the building cool. And it's just less than ideal. So definitely our infrastructure, our roofs and our HVAC, we still have $17 million in needs outstanding on that. And so that would be the first thing we address. We also want to continue to address safety. We would like to put some interior cameras into our schools. And with the technology of cameras right now, these are remotely accessible. And so if we get an alert that there's movement within our building overnight, for example, we can pull up our cell phones or our desktops or laptops and check out the camera systems. And if we were ever to have an emergency in the building, our first responders, our police departments, fire departments also have access to our cameras so they can see what's going on inside the schools. And that offers another degree of safety. I mentioned earlier our parking lots, particularly at Wood Oaks. We want to make that process of drop off and pick up more efficient. And we want to make it safer by separating the bus and the parent traffic by creating a separate loop. Excuse me. Our plan will also ensure that we can continue to educate our students in a modern environment. The picture at top is from the STEAM lab at Wood Oaks at the middle school. And this was created, I believe about 6 or 7 years ago. And you can see the whiteboards and the technology tables. That's for a robotics program. State-of-the-art facility. We will be able to always make sure that our students have that state-of-the-art. The picture on the lower left-hand side is actually from a 3rd grade classroom that is piloting some new furniture this year. And what's nice about this furniture, if you see those chairs, students can sit in those, for example, facing forward or backwards. They can sit on top of that chair. If they sit backwards, they can put their Chromebook on top and have that be an independent workstation. The desks are easy to move and rearrange if a teacher wants to transition from group work to independent learning into stations, whatever the case may be. The classroom can be rapidly rearranged to maximize learning time and efficiency. The desks and the tables we have now are really, like I said, they're at the end of life. They're welded together, the furnish and varnish is gone. They don't wipe as clean as they used to. And in fact, on surfaces, these desks actually serve as a whiteboard. So students, when they're learning math or doing other exercises in class, can write on the surface and have it wiped nice and clean and do that work right at their desk. So lots of updates to classroom furniture and fixtures that we would like to take advantage of and really make sure that we have that 21st learning environment, 21st century learning environment for our students. A big thing that I alluded to earlier is we do need to add at least 4 new classrooms at Hickory Point, or 4 classrooms is our proposal, I should say. We would like to add additional space for our early childhood programming and also for special education. Again, we've been creative. We've had to actually move some teachers that used to be in a classroom. We constructed some workspace in the building. They're basically large offices for some small group work, but we really would like the ability to have classrooms available for all of our learners and all of our teachers that need to learn in that environment. The other thing we would like to do is add a multi-use space to the school. Hickory Point's our only building that has only 1 gymnasium, and it's our gymnasium, it's our cafeteria, and it's our auditorium. And when that's being used throughout the day, we have a lot of conflicts. we've had instances in the past, we've had a guest speaker in, and it's operating as an auditorium. And if it's raining outside or poor weather outside, our PE classes are forced into the alcove area by the media center. And we've had instances where we've had 2 or 3 classrooms trying to have PE in a small environment where there's really not a lot of opportunity to do significant movement. And we really want to take advantage of having this additional space. And we also know that if this multi-use space is created, it's something that can be used by the community, even in non-school hours. So that's something that we would like to add to benefit our students and our learning environment, but also the community. The photos here, you can see that proposed addition, and this is just a rendering that our architects provided. This isn't, we haven't put the time in yet to design what this would look like, but that's just an example of what it could be. The picture at the bottom is our flex space, or multi-use space that we have at Wood Oaks, and having that space available really does enhance the learning environment and opportunities for our students and staff. All right, and again, this sustainable, responsible plan, we really feel like it addresses our challenges now, and it'll address our challenges into the future. So we will always be prepared to meet the changing needs in education. Our facilities will always be relevant and modern. We believe that an investment in the schools is an investment into the community. It's an investment into property values, and it's an investment for everybody. That's something we feel very strongly about. And so the plan that we talked about is now indeed a referendum. And the referendum, as you saw earlier, would establish a debt service extension base, a DSEB, where our payments and principal and interest could not exceed $2.65 million a year. The average cost of this would be $422 for a home that has an assessed value of $600,000. And if you visit our website, if you're watching this on a desktop, for example, and your cell phone's handy, you can scan the barcode here and the QR code, and it'll take you to a tax calculator that we also have on our website. So you can put in your precise assessed value of your home, not the market value, but the assessed value, which you can also find on the county's website, and find out what the impact would be for your home. And you can also enter if you have a homestead exemption, primary homestead exemption, or a senior exemption, for example, and you'll get a very close estimate of what this cost would be. All right, and what the ballot question will look like, and this is important because early voting is starting up, absentee voting is starting up. This is what people will see on the ballot. This is the language that you will see. I won't take the time to read it for you, but I'll give you a minute so you can see what the language is. Okay. And again, some important dates. The first thing was for tonight's meeting. This is our third informational session we've had about the referendum specifically. You have a QR code you can scan to request a ballot, and in-person early voting starts on March 17th through the 31st. So this is going to come up quick. Our school and all schools in the area have a spring break at the end of March, and we'll come back from that, and the election will be upon us. So just something to keep in mind if you want to think ahead towards maybe wanting to vote early or to request a mail ballot. All right. And finally, this is the last slide. Again, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. I hope I haven't gone too fast for you. If I have gone too fast and you have some additional questions, please check out our website. You can find it on our main page. We have a link to the site specifically about the referendum listed at the top of the website. Tara O'Connell, who I introduced earlier, she's our communication director. You can email her with a question, and she will either answer it or direct it to somebody who can. We also have a Q&A section where you can ask a question on our website. So please, when you have questions, reach out and we will do our best to answer those. All right, and again, we'll continue to take questions. All right, so we have a few different questions that have come in that perhaps were not answered during the webinar. One individual has inquired if the board has pursued selling corporate naming rights, either for classrooms or schools. And this is kind of interesting because it has come up. In our earlier proposals, one of the things we did explore was to add an auditorium to Wood Oaks. And while this is something that we would love to do, that would have required a higher level of funding than we felt like we were ready to ask for at this time. And so people have asked about naming rights for that. I will say that it's not that typical for K-12 schools to partner with corporations, but they will sometimes partner with private donors, and that's something that we could work with. But for example, the classroom additions at Hickory Point will come in around $2 million, the multi-use space around $2.4 million. And naming rights, personal contributions, they can help, but often they're a sliver of what we would need. But certainly we will always explore avenues. One avenue that I do want to explore with a multi-use space is with the Park District, for example. I've had some very preliminary conversations with them. Those of you in the community may know that the Park District partnered with District 28 for one of their gymnasiums. In the Park District, they've got a lot of their own work they're doing right now with the leisure center and so on. So they're not in a position to say yes or no, but that's a door we want to keep open and always look for partnerships. All right, good question here. With a perpetual source of funding like a DSEP, how is the district planning out proper governance and controls to make sure in the long term, once these immediate needs are covered, the district continues the history of excellence and financial stewardship? That's a great question. The DSEP does put the controls on us of how much we could pay back every year. And another thing that when we have that, we will always have a hearing before we levy more bonds. We're always required to post on our website. We have to post it in the media before we have a public hearing. And so that would be another source of transparency. And I did allude earlier to our clean audit reports and the pride that we take in being fiscally responsible. So some of the checks and balances include the limitations on the DSEB, how much we can actually borrow, and also just the process of public transparency, before a school board, 25 years from now, when I'm not in the district and our current administration is turned over, we will still have some of those checks and balances in place. This board will still need to do a hearing. And this amount of $2.6 million is locked in place. We do have an option. We did have an option. We could have asked for one that increased with the CPI value. And so that amount could go up every year. But we, again, with our history of fiscal responsibility, opted not to ask for that option. So we're going to be at that flat rate of $2.655 million from here on out. I hope that answers that question. So what were the community survey results of the 3 funding options in the fall? Again, that's what led us to the medium result, the medium level of funding. The high level would have been $60 million, and that would have been everything from an auditorium to some new music spaces at Wood Oaks. We're hoping we can still get to some of those music stations down the road, but the community was pretty clear that the medium response was the favorite. And actually, it probably went medium, high, low, and no funding in that order. So the community was kind of between a medium and a high level of funding, but we opted to go for the medium level because we felt that was the most responsible at this time and what the community definitely did favor at this time. The estimated interest rates on the bond, it's another good question. I think that, this is, I think they're coming in the 6th percentile right now. Kimberly, I don't know if you have a more accurate answer. We're not going to be ready to sell these for a while, but probably around 6.5 or so would be my guess. I don't have that exact number.
Yeah, Dr. Dieter, I agree with that response. We don't have the exact number right now. But obviously, it will be, a public, sale of bonds and we will obviously be transparent about the interest rate on the bond when that happens.
Yeah. All right. And Kimberly, you have, or this might be something you can help with too. Another question is how the developers of Our Lady in the Brook are contributing to these costs. And there is a process when there's a new development in the community where we have to anticipate the tax impact on our district and levy for that amount appropriately. There's a pretty good science to it, so we make sure we capture that incoming source. And just so the community knows, the development Our Lady of the Brook is proposed to be more of a senior community for ages 55 and up. So we're not expecting much, if any, impact in our enrollment from that development, but it certainly will help add to our community's tax base. So that is something that we welcome and are looking forward to. It's just a matter of making sure we capture that on our levy once that development's in place and it's time to go through that process. I don't know, Kimberly, if there's more you want to add to that.
Yes, with any new development, there's impact analysis that's completed with the Village of Northbrook and the developer, so that the school districts that are impacted, have a projection in terms of the potential number of families that may move into that subdivision. So that impact fee analysis, there's also a formula tied to it so that once occupancy is reached on the new development, there is a fee that the developer pays to each school district impacted. So that study will be done, obviously. And then, of course, once the property is developed and it comes on the tax rolls as new property, the school district as a levying organization can capture that new property so that we are basically adding that assessed valuation to our levy process. So those are two ways that we look at new developments.
All right. The next question is, has a merger with District 28 been looked at as a means of controlling expenses and better utilizing facilities? This is my fourth year in District 27 and my fourth year in Illinois coming from out of state. And I do know the history on this is about every 10 years, this gains some momentum. It's looked at and ultimately a conclusion is made that there's not really that economy of scale of savings by doing a merger with 27, 28, even 30, 31. Typically, for example, all of our buildings are at max capacity throughout Northfield Township. And so a consolidation doesn't really create any more space. We would just simply have to add on to a building if one were to close, kind of like we did in this district. Economy of scale savings could be in personnel and staff. But when these conversations, anytime they have gained steam, the communities have spoken up and said they like the identity of their existing district. And the conversations to this point haven't really gone any farther, but I think it's something that, can never be completely off the table. And it's just something we have to look at to see if it makes sense at the time. Another question is the annual tax increase in perpetuity or for a finite amount of time? Well, the increase would be for the duration of an outstanding bond. If we levy a bond, say we levy one for $5 million to address some immediate needs in a school, when that bond is paid off, that comes off the bill, if you will, or off the tab. It could be replaced. So the DSEB is in perpetuity. The amount that's levied on that DSEB can fluctuate over the years, but again, at that cap of 2.655.
And then Dr. Dieter, the last question, we did have another attendee ask a similar question about the projected timeline.
Yeah, just so everybody knows, the question is, if the referendum passes in April, what is the projected timeline in getting things started? That's another great question because as excited as we all are, we'd love to break ground on some projects this summer. But the reality is, we've got a lot of things to work out first. We don't have anything drawn by an architectural firm yet. We haven't put the money into that because we don't know if this will pass. So we have to go through a lot of stages of zoning, of approvals, of again, like the entire construction and bid process. So realistically, we probably wouldn't see new structures until the 27-28 school year. As much as I'd like to have them ready sooner, that's probably a realistic time frame. And one thing just so the community understands, at Hickory Point, it's a very small property. It's less than 9 acres. And one of the things we have to pay close attention to is water retention. If you live by Hickory Point, or if you drive by it, drop your kids off, you might see in the springtime and sometimes in the fall some standing water on the field. And that's by design. That's part of the water retention design. And there are a lot of limitations and regulations within that. And when we add more impervious surface to that site in a multi-use space and in classrooms, there is a chance that we're going to have to add underground water retention, which would be another cost and another part of that entire construction process. So that's something that we have to account for as well. Some of the other projects, some furniture, fixtures, and things of that nature, that could happen a little bit quicker. But again, we go through an entire process of selection, of bidding out, making sure we've got the best prices, and everything like that that we have to go through. So we'll be as fast as we can, but also be very fiscally responsible through this process. Okay. That's it for the questions that I see that have been entered to this point. Again, thank you so much, everybody, for your time. And if you have further questions, feel free to email, to go to the website, give me a call, set up a meeting. Happy to have further conversations. Again, really appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight. And once this presentation, we have to make sure that it becomes accessible for all viewers. Once it is ready, it'll be posted on our website, and you can view it then. All right. All right. Again, thank you so much for your time. I hope everybody has a wonderful evening.